The Falklands War, 1982. High on a remote glacier, Special Forces troops are trapped by hurricane-force winds. Royal Navy helicopters stage a daring rescue, risking catastrophic engine failure.
Have I got the bottle? It's no good putting on a uniform and saying, yeah, I'm in the Navy, of course I can go to war tomorrow. You don't know.
In a lethal maze of ice and rock, the only way out is by radar.
You can't see. It's like being in the dark, but it's white.
3 helicopters head into the void. Only one will come back. South Georgia, a remote and forbidding outcrop in the far south of the Atlantic. 12,000 kilometers from London, the island is a British territory dating back more than 200 years. 11 mountains soar over 2,000 meters, with majestic glaciers spanning the gaps. From April to September, only scientists brave the hostile winter. But on March 19, 1982, Argentinian forces invade the island, occupying the few human settlements. Then, 14 days later, Argentina annexes the Falklands, 1,300 kilometers to the northwest. The British government responds in force. A heavily armed task force, spearheaded by 2 aircraft carriers, sets sail for the Falklands. But another, smaller force gathers in secret. Just 4 ships, with orders to retake South Georgia. On the flagship, HMS Antrim, one aging helicopter is destined to fire the opening shots, a Westland Wessex 3, affectionately known as Humphrey. 19 years old even then, it's now housed in the Navy's Fleet Air Arm Museum. As the veteran crew recall, Wessex 3s had a single engine with a worrying failure rate.
I mean, the one thing I always think about in retrospect, how many failures they'd had on Wessex 3 engines before we went up.
Well, I'd had 2.
Yeah?
Had 2, one in the water.
Yeah. In Wessex 3 as well?
Yeah, I've had quite a few heavy landings.
But Humphrey is a much-loved old workhorse. The pilot, Lieutenant Commander Ian Stanley.
And you get to the edges of the flight envelope quite often. It's when you get too close to it, or you're being pushed by circumstances to get too close to it, that life gets a little bit more interesting.
And we would have done it at the end of the day.
Stanley's crew, Chris Parry, Stuart Cooper, and Dave Fitzgerald. 4 men, and the machine that carried them to war. April 1982. Aboard the Antrim, the grapevine buzzes about a mysterious troop of soldiers.
We all sort of whispered to each other, didn't we? Are these guys in the SAS?
Who are these guys?
I mean, why have they got long hair and why are they speaking with Irish accents?
And they started
We had them in our mess, and they brought all their guns with them.
All right.
And they actually kept their
They
guns.
sleep with their
them.
guns.
They slept
Oh,
with
I
their
see.
guns.
This is the elite Special Air Service, hardened by years of covert operations in Northern Ireland.
There's a way to make an entrance.
This is my destiny.
It was now a conspiracy of witches.
Download Veely today.
Now they have a spectacular plan to retake South Georgia by helicopter.
The first time we heard about it, of course, is when we arrived off South Georgia.
That's right.
And they said, we want to go there. And we went, you what?
The flight plan verges on the impossible. The gateway to South Georgia is the face of a glacier, 3/4 the height of the Empire State Building. Higher still, the route twists and climbs between huge mountains, while the temperature plummets. The drop zone is the very top of Fortuna Glacier, 600 meters above sea level and -20 Celsius. From there, the SAS will cover the last 15 kilometers on foot. Their objective? The Argentinian garrison at Leith Harbour.
I remember you saying, why are we going up there? And this chap said to you, well, they won't expect us to come from that direction. and you said, well, they won't expect you to come by Polaris missile either. There's no good reason to do it. And I remember thinking, that's a really gutsy call, that.
On April 21st, the SAS make their move. The strike team, 16 highly trained specialists in Arctic and mountain warfare. Three helicopters head for the glacier. Most of the SAS go in 2 Wessex troop carriers, each with ample room for fully kitted soldiers. Humphrey takes the lead, acting as the mission's Pathfinder. Instead of troops, the bulk of the cabin is filled with radar navigation equipment. The radar's transmitter gives the Wessex 3 its distinctive hump. Humphrey and its crew normally specialize in anti-submarine warfare. But for this mission, Lieutenant Chris Parry will improvise, adapting Humphrey's radar for navigation.
What we're being required to do is flying between mountains in cloud, because most of the days in South Georgia the weather was atrocious. Heavy cloud, snowstorms and very high winds indeed, and possibly charts that weren't entirely accurate.
Co-pilot Stuart Cooper is an extra pair of eyes and ears, monitoring the instrument panel and the daunting mountain terrain. As flight photographer, he also captures a unique record of the mission.
You can see the scale of the cliffs behind the helicopter. Huge, over 1,000 feet, just immediate rise from the sea.
Air crewman Dave Fitzgerald keeps a doorway lookout, in constant communication with his pilot. Even this barren landscape might be patrolled by the enemy.
You're always looking out to see the flash of a small arms fire or something, you know. And in fact, the weather was so bad, if they had any sense, they were all indoors, and that's what we were banking on.
The Argentinians stay under cover. But the real enemy is about to strike.
We soon hit a really bad weather front. We got buffeted on the way in quite severely. We were working pretty hard to make sure we weren't going to crash into something.
The glacier looms through thickening cloud and driving snow. With solid ice and rock on all sides, Ian Stanley is flying blind. The 2 troop carriers stay close, anxious to maintain visual contact as Stanley leads the way. Navigating by radar, Chris Parry struggles to find the narrow gaps between the mountains.
I was desperately trying to fix the helicopter's position, and on the radar I could see these massive sort of edges against the mountains. And on several occasions we were getting a mismatch between what people were saying was out the front of the aircraft, what was on the radar and what was on the charts.
The problem is, Parry's radar is really designed to hunt submarines. The radar beam is reflected if a submarine breaks the surface of the ocean. So it works best in a flat environment. With skill, it can be used for navigation. The echoes from the landscape give a rough idea of the changing terrain. But in the mountains, the radar bounces in all directions. False echoes can cause a fatal collision with solid rock. For safety, a skilled navigator compares the radar data with his maps and the evidence of his own eyes.
Up ahead you've got 2 small islands. Yeah, that's not very nice, is it? Yeah.
Ian Stanley retired from the Royal Navy 9 years ago. But now he's back in the saddle, over Loch Lomond in the Scottish Highlands. A stretch of water with steep hills on either side. 26 years on, Stanley plans to fly between the hills, the way he did on South Georgia, blind.
Okay, and if you'd like to go onto your hood now. Okay.
With the hood on, all he can see is the instrument panel.
Okay, you're in the middle of the lock now. Turn left back onto 005.
He has an artificial horizon for staying level, an altimeter for height above the water, and a compass to steer by.
When you're flying on instruments, and you learn this right from day one when you start doing it, you have to build up resistance to what your ears and balance system's telling you. So that what you see is right, as opposed to what you feel.
Now on the 1 o'clock range, 400 yards. Nearest point landed, so just jutting out on the right-hand side, 12:15, range 1 mile.
The navigator guides Stanley towards a bottleneck, just 180 meters wide.
Left onto 330.
But the radar must be confirmed by human eyes. The crew gives Stanley as many visual updates as they can.
Okay, we've got nice wide open space out to the left. Continue left up to 335. Turn right to 330.
His final destination is marked by power lines.
The northwest where it gets quite narrow.
Right, so if I have control,
It's a tight squeeze, but he's made it.
the track, so you'll see as we come over the top here how narrow the gap was that you've come through, so...
Oh, yeah. Probably just as well I couldn't see you.
Yeah.
South Georgia. With visibility close to zero, Chris Parry cross-checks the radar with the crew's verbal updates.
We're picking up clues, glimpses of a mountain here, glimpses of a bit of glacier there, and we're trying to piece it all together like a giant jigsaw.
Air crewman Dave Fitzgerald gives Ian Stanley feedback from the side doorway.
You're reporting back everything that you can see, especially anything coming in from the side. I'm telling him, yes, you're at 40 feet, 50 feet, whatever.
Co-pilot Stuart Cooper senses danger all around.
As we flew up the glacier, I was aware that there were rocks and in fact mountains on either side. I couldn't see it because it was shrouded in mist, but the fact that you knew it was there was enough to focus the mind, never mind your eyes.
25 minutes from HMS Antrim, they reach the drop zone near the top of Fortuna Glacier. The two troop carriers stay close, waiting to unload their cargoes of SAS men. But Ian Stanley will test the ground first. He and crewman Dave Fitzgerald must somehow find a safe landing spot. The only trouble is, they can't see more than a few meters in any direction. Loch Lomond, 26 years later. Ian Stanley faces the same task he had on top of Fortuna Glacier. He's flying on instruments alone.
You have control. Okay, I have control.
Flying blind, he must reach the drop zone, an island in the middle of the loch. But like Humphrey, the helicopter has a built-in instrument to guide him. The Doppler. The crosshair gives him the vital information he needs, which way he's moving and how fast.
There's a little circle in the middle. If you're on that little circle, you're doing 5 knots, either 5 knots left, 5 knots ahead, or whatever.
At little more than walking pace, Stanley fine-tunes his position. Until finally, he's directly over the drop zone.
5, easy, steady. Okay, I'm happy in that position there.
Doppler's indicating in the middle. Okay.
Close enough for visual contact, even in a blizzard. On Fortuna Glacier, Stanley prepares to land. But one of his instruments has a problem. The radar altimeter, or radalt, measures height using a beam of radar waves. If the helicopter goes up, an onboard computer brings it back down automatically. In theory, the pilot chooses the height he wants, and the computer keeps him there. But on Fortuna Glacier, something strange is going on.
The radalt is jumping and jerking, and 1 minute it's indicating 50 feet, the next minute 200 feet.
The drop zone is scarred by crevasses, hundreds of meters deep.
I remember looking out that window on the other side and looking down and thinking, Jesus Christ, that just goes all the way down.
Well, that's right, because the thing is, I'm saying to you, this is really dark blue. Then it's true what they say about the inside of glaciers, it's really dark blue.
The radar altimeter thinks they're up high. On automatic hover, it will drag them into the abyss. So Stanley stays on manual control. His radalt and Doppler readings must be confirmed by human eyes.
I'm telling him, yes, you're at 40 feet, 50 feet, whatever. So he's also balancing that with what he's seeing and what he's hearing from the flight control system.
So, you've got a big crevasse just out the window here. You better move over. As we were coming down, I moved left and took up a new hover.
We're going down, we're going down! And I did say to the pilot, you're going down, you're going down. And in the end, he said, I am not bloody well going down. Shut up. I said, no, you're absolutely right. You're not going down. It's just the ground on the right is coming up to meet us.
Stanley decides to risk a landing.
The aircraft's quite heavy, so there's quite a lot of pressure going on one of those wheels, which might just have punched through something like a snow bridge. So it was a long time before I put all the weight on the wheels.
With Stanley safely down, the 2 troop carriers go next. Lieutenant Mike Tidd has the lives of 7 SAS men in his hands.
Instead of having, a rock face or something to give you references as you let yourself down onto the glacier, you were looking out over nothing.
The 2 troop carriers have very little guidance equipment. Tidd has no Doppler to tell him which way he's moving.
And yes, you can tell what your height is, but what you can't tell is what your relative movement to the ground is, and you also can't tell if 20 yards in front of you there is a 3,000-foot granite cliff face.
But with Ian Stanley below him on the ice, Tidd does have a way to get his bearings.
Okay.
The flight simulator at Royal Naval Air Station Culdrose in Cornwall.
Back there, I'll just give myself a run in.
Mike Tidd's about to make his first helicopter landing for 6 years.
Yeah. So we're going to take that down. My viz looks fine, doesn't it?
Yeah, that viz is okay at the moment.
Ian Stanley is going to give him a few problems.
Just going to crank the viz down a little bit, Mike.
Yeah, okay. Got a little bit of light snow there. Christ, I'd say my viz is probably a couple hundred yards at most.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Not a lot to see at the moment.
Much more than that. Do you want to try a landing from there?
Yeah. Okay.
Tid's looking for something on the ground to give him the reference point he needs. And here's his chance.
Well, let's take a patch over here between the trees.
Well, that's pretty good, isn't it? You've got references there.
Yeah, I've got some references there.
Oh, now we're getting tricky.
On the way down, Tid keeps the same tree in his right-hand window. When the rotors kick up a cloud of snow, he uses the tree to get his bearings.
Come on, girl. Come on. That's it. There you are.
Life is a bit easier when there's a great big tree to look at, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does help. Good landing. Excellent.
On Fortuna Glacier, conditions are far worse. Both troop carriers make it down, but the pilots are fighting for control.
The wind was such that it was moving us across the surface of the glacier, which when A, you're trying to unload troops, and B, you're trying not to fall into crevasses, can be quite disconcerting, really.
The SAS face a 15-kilometre march to the Argentinian position on the coast. The troops cannot be identified for security reasons.
The visibility was down to zero because the blizzards were whipping up ice from the glacier. It was colder than anything I'd ever been in. When I checked my weapon, it was totally iced up.
But SAS mountain troops are trained to operate in hostile conditions.
At the end of the day, they seemed to have the right kit. They had skis, they had mountain and Arctic warfare equipment, and they should know what they're doing.
They'd walked a few yards, and they were disappearing into the swirling snow and the mist. And I remember the face looking up and the wave, and then we went.
That was the job done as far as we were concerned. We were very happy to get off the glacier and very happy to get back to the ship.
But behind them, the SAS are going nowhere. Ian Stanley and his team haven't heard the last from Fortuna Glacier. As night falls, the SAS face the ferocious reality of winter on South Georgia. In the gathering storm, the temperature drops to -20 Celsius. Winds reach 185 kilometers an hour, hurricane force.
It was so cold that I couldn't think straight. I could even feel the pain in my teeth, and we were all looking for signs of frostbite.
Hampered by deep crevasses, the SAS cover less than a kilometer. They try to make camp, but the tents are ripped from their frozen hands. Shivering in bare sleeping bags, they're rapidly sealed in a shroud of snow. In relative safety aboard ship, even the helicopter crews are struggling to sleep.
We were so worried about the rising sea, not only very choppy water, but also a very, very long and high swell. We're being rolled around in our bunks. The ship was pitching around really, really violently.
By first light, the situation on the glacier is desperate. The SAS have no defense against frostbite and hypothermia.
No one wanted to admit it, but we were struggling to survive, let alone get up the glacier and onto the objective.
The troop captain admits defeat. Their only chance of survival, to go out the way they came in.
These were very high quality soldiers, ones we needed for the Falklands, and we knew the situation they were in. We knew it was desperate. We had seen at first hand what the conditions were like, and we didn't need any convincing to go back up there, to tell you the truth. It was only going to be us that took them off.
All 3 helicopters head back to South Georgia, this time in the fury of the storm.
On the second day, the winds were infinitely more violent and they were more unpredictable as well.
Co-pilot Stuart Cooper describes the scale of the challenge.
This was the sight that greeted us as we came towards the front of the glacier. And you can see there's some small waves on the picture here which give an idea of scale. Then you look up and you realise you're looking up a very steep front to the glacier. And as we flew in, that was what faced us.
Ian Stanley faces a climb of nearly 300 metres with a single suspect engine. The violent winds could smash him back into the sea. The crew are on maximum alert. Stuart Cooper knows the slightest mistake could be fatal.
If you're too close to a cliff, you will get pushed down. It could be incredibly dangerous.
As the air crewman in the doorway, my major responsibilities really was to watch the tail rotor, because you don't want the tail rotor even slightly touching something, because it will throw you into a bit of a tailspin.
"26 years later, pilot Ian Stanley squeezes through a narrow pass in freezing mountains near Loch Lomond. The rotors are just a few metres from the mountainside.
We're getting close to the cloud base. The cloud may be sucked down on top of us, but I think Richard references out to the right.
Roger.
You can continue.
Left only 25 yards. Okay, left only. Just clear, tail clear.
Stanley must look out for sudden changes in wind speed and direction.
Rising air at the moment, I believe. So.
Okay, distant tail all clear.
Thank you.
Right now, Stanley's hitching a ride on an updraft. Warm air rising from below.
9 o'clock, 40 yards, next pull.
This means he can use much less engine power.
We're pulling around about 80% at the moment, so I'm quite happy. Okay. Good overshoot down the right.
It's vital to have power in reserve, in case of emergency.
1 o'clock, 25 yards, just clear, tail clear.
On cold mountains and glaciers, the most dangerous wind strikes from above. Cold air is heavier than warm air, so it falls at high speed down any steep slope. This is called a catastrophic wind. On the face of a glacier, a helicopter is in constant danger of these sudden downdrafts. The pilot must be ready to fight back with maximum power.
This is true of any sort of very steep cliff or hillside, depending on the winds coming from. If you've got an enormous updraft, you can find yourself in a situation with no power on at all. Then it might change, and you'll suddenly have to take a great big handful of power to arrest the rate of descent. You've got to fight against them.
All 3 pilots ride a roller coaster of rapidly changing winds. The downdraft put Humphrey's single engine under maximum strain.
What was going through all of our minds was, oh dear, I wonder what's going to happen if the engine stops now. You know, where do we go from here? We'd never seen anything like it. looking at a solid wall of ice and going higher and higher and higher up into the cloud and on top of it.
But at last, they make it over the face. Ian Stanley leads the formation, with Chris Parry's radar seeking out the route ahead. They soon locate the SAS, barely advanced from the original drop zone. After 26 hours on the ice, even Special Forces troops are desperate to escape.
Mike Tidd had got his guys in quite quickly. He could see down the glacier, he could see a way off. And because they were there, he was ready to go.
As flight commander, Stanley makes a fateful decision.
And he thought, well, there's a good window of opportunity here, you know, I shall grab this. And he asked, can I go? I can see my way off. And I said, yeah, okay, away you go.
In these ferocious winds, visibility comes and goes in seconds.
And I headed off down the glacier, and I guess I got about half a mile down the glacier, and then the wind just kicked round as it does there, kicked round by, I don't know, 30, 40 degrees or so, and all of a sudden I was into instant snowstorm.
Mike Tidd is in total whiteout, with no radar.
You were looking out over nothing. It was like sort of floating in space. Tail hit, crash down onto the ice. And I remember lying there in my straps thinking, Mrs. Tidd's not going to like being a widow.
As the sudden squall dies away, Stuart Cooper looks on in horror.
I remember a few expletives being uttered in the cockpit as we watched this in slow motion almost.
They rush to check for casualties. Cooper grabs a unique snapshot.
The engine's still running, so there's still some steam or exhaust coming out from that area. The crew are still in the aircraft. The guys are still in the back, and the door hasn't actually yet been opened. And as you can see, the other members of the SAS from the other helicopter are coming over to render assistance. Myself and Ian stayed in the front of the aircraft because that's why I had time to take a photograph. We could do nothing else other than just hold on to the controls and wait, because to leave or let go of the controls or leave the aircraft would have been suicide because the wind was so strong, anything could have happened.
The only injuries are minor cuts. 6 SAS, Mike Tidd and his crewmen squeeze into Ian Stanley's helicopter.
Bless him, he said, God, you're a messy bugger. He said, aren't you? He said, you've left your windscreen wiper on. And I said, if you can find the switch, you go and turn the bloody thing off.
The other 10 SAS pile into the second troop carrier. The pilot, Ian Georgeson, knows whiteout could strike again at any moment. With no radar, Georgeson must stay on Stanley's tail, all the way off the glacier.
What's his speed, Fred? 30, okay.
But in the simulator, Mike Tidd shows it's easier said than done.
What's his speed, Fred?
Ian Stanley plans to make the conditions as bad as Fortuna Glacier.
As we head up the valley, what we'll do is we'll just reduce the visibility down steadily and probably increase the turbulence a little bit, so make it a little bit more hard work, regrettably for you.
Thanks, mate.
There she goes, that's the bit reducing down.
That's better, that's a bit more like the real thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty realistic, I'd have said.
To maintain visual contact, Tidd must keep within just 3 rotor lengths.
Right, Fred.
Now Stanley does his worst.
Hold that heading there, and we'll reduce the visibility a bit further, if we can. Okay.
and increasing the turbulence if we can do that. It's getting a bit more realistic now, isn't it? As you get
yeah, this is better. I mean, all I've got is
an aeroplane.
Is him.
We've still got a bit of ground there to look at. So can we reduce that ground viz a bit more?
Tid's fighting to judge scale and distance.
I'm having great difficulty in hanging on to him now.
Yeah, you've got virtually zero viz now.
Yeah.
It's a total whiteout.
That must be what Ian had.
Yeah.
I've lost him. Shit. So,
where are you?
Where am I? I'm high.
Still got 30 knots.
Still got 30 knots. Let's see if I can pick you up again. No, oh, just the ground. Oh.
On Fortuna Glacier, Ian Georgeson becomes the second victim of whiteout.
At the very moment when I put my head round into the glass bubble of the window on the side of the aircraft, I saw him plough into the ground.
The wreckage rapidly disappears from view. Already overloaded, Ian Stanley can only head back to the ship.
It had gone horribly wrong at that stage of the game, and I must admit I was feeling it a bit, just going over in my head if we could have done something differently.
12 men are missing, possibly dead, somewhere on the glacier.
What we were really concerned about is that the aircraft had crashed and everybody had been killed. We just didn't know what had happened. We knew it had crashed into the glacier. And I came up on the radio to the ship as soon as we were clear and said, we're heading back, we've got so many people on board, but I have to tell you we've lost our 2 chicks.
Ian Georgeson and his team were really good buddies of mine. I felt as I'd been kicked in the stomach.
But their worries proved to be short-lived.
There was a call up from the ops room on the tactical intercom to say they'd managed to make radio contact with Ian Georgeson and co, and that they were all alive.
With the temperature at -20 Celsius and falling, the downed men take shelter in a helicopter life raft. Already freezing, the SAS troops face another night on the glacier. Parry and Stanley go back to the drawing board. Humphrey is now the only helicopter left for the job in the entire South Georgia task force.
We thought we'd actually run out of lives the day before, and we wondered whether we had any lives left for another mission up on that glacier.
Another rescue attempt means enormous risk. They must somehow pack 16 men in an aging helicopter built for 4.
We decided we'd give it one more go before it got dark.
I wrote a letter to my wife. I enclosed my wedding ring. A lot of things were going around in my head. What had happened to the 2 other aircraft, the fact we were a single-engine helicopter, old aircraft. I'd seen the conditions, and just in case.
Stanley plans to come in high, the best vantage point for the surge. But now he's above the cloud layer, hoping against hope for the clouds to part.
And as we came over the top of where the glacier would be, I don't know what it was, but we looked down, and there, big hole in the cloud, a red dinghy.
Could look down through some of the cloud, through what we call suckers gaps. It's where gaps appear in the cloud. You go for them, of course, and it closes up as you're going through it. That's why it's called a sucker's gap.
We just thought, here's a chance, let's go for it. And we dived straight down through the hole and landed alongside them.
It's only a sucker's gap if it closes up as you go through it. It's an inspired piece of airmanship if you take your chances.
To save weight, the crew must persuade the SAS to abandon their kit.
They wanted to bring their Bergens as well.
Yeah,
Bergens,
that's right. Armor-lights from Northern Ireland. Yeah. This has been with me for 12 years.
Yes.
I prefer this to my wife, was one of the comments I heard.
Well, I just made that. I said, OK, you can keep your weapons, but you just make sure you unload them.
Well, getting 12 guys into an anti-submarine Wessex 3 is rather like the competition to get how many people you can into a Mini. And a certain amount of cooperation is required to get all these people, and these were big guys in most cases.
We just kept cramming them in wherever we could find a space.
And I reckon about 4 of them sat like that here.
Yeah, I'm
and about
sure that.
4 or 5 standing or sitting behind me here.
We crammed them in there somehow, and I remember them all being up this side.
Yeah.
And then 2 behind me as well. And in fact, one was holding on to me because there were so many people in, I couldn't find anywhere to hook my harness onto.
The 4 crew, 10 SAS and 2 downed airmen squeeze in around the vital radar gear. Humphrey is now more than 600 kilos over the maximum takeoff weight. But Ian Stanley knows the wind, for once, is blowing in his favour.
The fact it was windy and it was cold was to our advantage.
Well, I mean, the fact we were a ton overweight when we took off, I remember thinking at the time, when we discussed it, of course, we actually had to wait for some of the wind to get up before we could actually lift in safety.
Humphrey drags its tired old bones aloft. For the first time in almost 30 hours, the SAS can draw a warm breath.
And I'm sure I could smell burning. Half a dozen of them had lit up their cigarettes. And I'm thinking, hang on, we're sitting on a half a ton of aviation fuel here, and these guys are lighting up. I said to the pilots, can you smell burning?
But even the pilots are feeling the tension. The greatest danger is still to come. Landing back on deck. The standard procedure: hover alongside, then match the up and down rhythm of the deck, before timing the landing at the ship's highest point. Heavily overloaded, Stanley fears his single engine will fail at the worst possible moment.
You need more power to come alongside the ship because you're using it to stay in tune with the ship before you land.
With all those SAS guys in the back, we were thinking if we did ditch over the sea, are any of us going to get out of this? Because it would be a real bum fight inside to get out. And the Wessex 3 didn't have a great record for staying on the surface once you ditched.
No, well, it invariably rolls over.
Yeah.
And with the number of people who are in the back, I wouldn't have put any confidence in everyone getting out, to be honest.
The nightmare prospect: ditching in the freezing South Atlantic. This is the Royal Navy's underwater escape unit, the dreaded Dunker, where aircrew are trained to act fast or die. Chris Parry and Ian Stanley are about to experience the ordeal of a deck landing gone wrong. A flooded helicopter in near total darkness. Rolling into the deep.
It enables you to answer questions about yourself.
Oh, I got one.
Have I got the bottle for it? It's one of the things you have to answer in wartime as well. Have I got the bottle?
Off South Georgia, this would be a freezing, storm-tossed sea.
Hopefully is an instinctive reaction to get yourself out, but whether you'd survive in the sea is a completely different matter. I think 4 minutes and you'd be dead. Not much more than that.
The lives of 16 men in the hands of one pilot. Ian Stanley is about to relive the SAS rescue with his first deck landing for 23 years. Joining him again, Chris Parry. The team that flew Humphrey back to HMS Antrim.
Right, just like the old times. Let's get the eyeballs moving around a little bit and I can get them back up to speed again.
Approaching Antrim, Humphrey's packed passengers steeled themselves for landing on the heaving deck.
I knew that it was going to be a bit of a heavy landing, or as Ian liked to call it, more of a controlled crash.
So mainly just need to increase the rate of the angle of bank on this one, I think. Okay.
And you've got to bear in mind that quite a few of those SAS guys had already been in 2 crashes that day, and they're in the 3rd aircraft now. Does lightning strike 3 times? I reckon some of them must have been thinking.
I need to come over to the left now. That's good. Good power.
If the engine fails, Stanley must ditch in the freezing sea.
Okay, 30 across now, sir. I'm clear to move over. Yeah.
God forbid, if one wheel goes over the side of the deck, the aircraft is gone.
Smacked it on the deck, slammed the brakes on, and we were there. Quite a relief.
Well, for a first one for ages, that was spot on. Yeah, good. No problems at all with that. Enjoyed that. So did we.
By saving the lives of 16 SAS and 4 fellow airmen, Stanley's crew averts a shattering blow to British morale.
And at that stage of the game, it sort of dawned, I must admit, it dawned on me, well, that was jolly exciting. Let's not we have any more of that, you know, let's do something very boring.
It didn't happen.
And it didn't happen.
Why did that
We don't do boring.
Humphrey and its crew go on to play a crucial role in the war with Argentina. 2 days later, they're back in the anti-submarine business. They fired the first shots of the South Georgia campaign, depth charges, disabling a vital enemy vessel. British ships are now free to bombard the Argentinians into surrender. They make a famous signal to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in Downing Street.
The White Ensign flies alongside the Union Jack in South Georgia. God save the Queen.
What happens next, Mr. Nott?
Thank you very much.
What's your reaction?
Rejoice at that news and congratulate our forces and the Marines.
Are we going
Good
to
night,
declare war on
gentlemen.
Argentina, Mrs. Thatcher?
26 days later, Humphrey joins the full-scale invasion that finally brings the Falkland Islands back into British hands. But the success of the entire war began on South Georgia, with one helicopter and its crew.
Afterwards, you might say, my God, that was frightening. But, you know, just the ability to get on and do the job is, I think, is absolutely testament to training.
But I think the chemistry was absolutely right between the 4 of us.
I think it was extraordinary leadership, personally.
It was extraordinary. I think all of us could say, Ian, it was extraordinary. You're absolutely right.